Hey everyone, this is Zach here. Today I'm going to walk through an automated process to back up your Ansible Automation Platform instance and upload that to AWS S3. So for my example, like I mentioned, I'm using S3, but for you, you may not use AWS. So this process would still apply for any other downstream storage that you're going to leverage, whether that be Azure Blob Storage or Google Storage account, or even just somewhere on-prem that you want to place your backups for safekeeping. The process diagram I have in my blog post here is intended to outline some of the flags that I've created for this playbook to allow you to be a little bit flexible as you're leveraging it and making it work in your environment. So there are three flags. The first one being cleaning up the backups directory. So this would be like as you're testing, right? You may not want to be doing a ton of backups, right? They can be rather large. So the first step the playbook can do is actually kind of clean up that directory, make sure nothing's there. The second step is whether or not you actually want to do the backup. So this may seem counterintuitive, like why would I need that option? But if you're troubleshooting, let's say you fail on the last step, right? So placing it in whatever desired storage, you may want to, on a successive run, skip the backup, right? Save yourself that time so you can troubleshoot figuring out how to get it to your storage location versus waiting for it to redo the backup. So that's what those flags are for there. The first two kind of work in tandem, right? If you're skipping the backup, you probably don't want to clean up the backups directory because you want to be able to reuse the existing backup to test out the third piece, right? And then again, that third piece is uploading to S3 for me. Could be something else for you. But of course, you don't have to do that at all. If you just want to have the backup stored locally on some management server, that's fine as well. And you could skip that step altogether. So when we get into controller, I'm going to walk through the job template itself, but just as a high level, I use a survey to prompt for the flags I just mentioned above, as well as some other variables that are important for managing where does the backup land, and then where do we source the backup for the upload. And then I do want to note, if you are going to go through with the S3 upload and you're using AWS credentials, what I do is I put a credentials file on the management host itself at .bodo in my home directory. And by default, the S3 sync task actually looks there for credentials. And this simplifies things for me as I don't have to create a custom credential type in AAP and attach it to the job template. The module's already going to look at this location. If I keep it on that server, all will be well. So here's the simple file that I put there, and obviously fill in with your credentials to make this work. But this is a simple way to do it, especially if you're just testing out some of the AWS operations. And at the end here, I will get to leveraging the S3 lifecycle. So, one thing you may want to do is if you're uploading a bunch of backups to S3 is, set them to expire, right? You don't want to have your storage growing exponentially, and you may not need super old backups. So I'll show how to do that. Like you could do it with Ansible, but why do something with Ansible if the S3 or the cloud provider actually has a mechanism for doing so, and S3 does. So without further ado, let's hop over into Ansible Automation Platform. I'm going to go over to my templates, and I'm going to launch the AAP Backup Platform. So here's my survey where the first thing I'm asking for is my target host. And you'll see in the playbook how that's variabilized. But for me, I have a host called manager in my inventory, which is where I do my Ansible installation from. And that's pretty common, actually, to have a management server that does the installation, does backups, and can do restores as well. I then have a path to my installation directory. This should be where does the setup.sh script live, right? So the directory where the setup.sh script is, that's very important. And then the second piece is a little bit more flexible. So where do you want the backup to land? In my case, I created a directory called AAP Backups, and that's where the output of running setup.sh with the -b option is going to put my tarball. Then I have some AWS variables here. So what region do I want to run against? And then what S3 bucket am I targeting? And then followed by the flags themselves. One thing to note here is I like to make these single select just to prevent fat finger or anything like that, so somebody can select true or false. I will show in the playbook that when you put things into a survey as multiple select or single select, they come through as strings. So we are going to want to parse those to make sure they're treated as booleans, but I'll show you guys how I do that in the playbook. So let me go ahead and click next and launch. And while that's running, I'm going to take you over to GitHub, where we can actually view the playbook itself. So If you go to the source in the Autodotes blog post, it's going to take you a README. And that README is basically the TLDR of the blog post itself, and it has a link to this playbook. So you can click Playbook, and it'll take you right here. Again, I variabilized hosts, so that's going to come from the survey. I've turned off gather facts because I don't really care about facts for this particular workflow. And then again, just another place for you to reference the variables. They're in the survey, they're in the blog post, they're in the README, and they're here as well, just to give you an idea of where, what variables need to be set for this to work. So the first task is going to be cleaning up the backup directory. Again, you can turn this off with the flag, but all it's going to do is wipe out that backup directory file or folder. And then the second step is pretty agnostic of the first one, right? If it doesn't exist, it'll create it. If it does exist, it won't do anything. So that's just to make sure that when you do run setup.sh, the directory that you're targeting exists. Third step, of course, is to run setup.sh. If you've ever done this manually, this command probably looks pretty familiar to you. You have the -b there at the end, as well as I pass an extra var, so backup_destination, with my backups directory that I want to land the files in. I think that's pretty important for an automated workflow to be very explicit about where you want it to go, especially because we're going to reference that output later on to upload it to S3. So the final piece of this playbook is going to be my upload to S3 block. I mentioned earlier, for you this might not be S3, but whatever target storage you're targeting, this is where you would implement the tasks to get your tarball to that location. Would be kind of at the end here, and you could leverage the same logic that I've used to pull the backup file. So the first thing I'm doing here is when setup.sh script runs, it always outputs the same Automation Platform Backup latest symlink, which I actually really like because I can then target that symlink. I know it's going to be there, and I can figure out what the target is, and then from there I know exactly what backup I just took, and it'll have a timestamp as well, which can be useful. So once I've found the information about the symlink, I go ahead and make sure I have pip installed, and then the Python package is required to actually do the upload to S3. So these steps may not be necessary for you depending on what you're doing. And then I'm going to extract the date from that symlink. So you notice here I'm using the output from that stat task, and I'm finding the link target. So that's going to be the actual backup file that was created. And I'm doing some split Python magic to parse out the date itself. And I'm going to get it in the year, month, date format. And from there, I'm going to go ahead and upload it to S3. So you can see why I parse the date out is actually this key prefix variable. So it'll create a folder in my S3 bucket, which just makes it a little bit easier to keep things organized in S3, right? As opposed to just having a bunch of files with super long names, it'll create a folder with the date. So it's easier for me to find what I'm looking for. The file root, again, it's actually just pointing at that link target. As opposed, I could probably point at the symlink, I'd be fine, but I'm pointing at the link target, which is the actual source for the backup itself. And then this could be an option for you if you're using environment variables for your access key and secret key. I mentioned earlier I'm using that credentials file, so I could actually remove these two records and I would be fine. But in the case that you're using environment variables, this is how you would reference them. And the last step is just setting stats. So that would be if you're using a workflow, or maybe there's a second step here after uploading the backup, it could be useful to have the output from the S3 step, and that's what I'm doing is set stats. So that's more of a kind of a metadata operation that could be useful in the future. So now let's hop back over into Ansible Automation Platform and see what's going on. So it looks like the backup's still going. While that's running, what I'll go ahead and do now is hop over to S3 and show you guys what it looks like as of right now. So for now, I've run it a few times, so almost once a day here. Probably too frequent for me in my home lab, maybe not too frequent for your organization. But the idea here is that you see that folder that got created. So if I click into any of these, that's that key prefix variable, and then here's the actual tarball for the backup itself. And what we should see once the playbook finishes running today is a folder 2024-08-28, which would contain our tarball from today. And the last piece that I want to talk about for this particular demo is leveraging Lifecycle for S3 buckets, right? I mentioned you could use Ansible to parse out the dates from the file names and be like, hey, this file is older than 30 days. I want to delete it. But why not just let AWS do that for me? So in S3, You can do this at the bucket level. There's this tab called management here. So if I click on management, I can create what's called a lifecycle rule. And what I'll do is I'll call this expire after 30 days. And again, this is totally up to you. Like, what is your retention policy within your organization? How long do you need to keep these backups? And how often do you need to take them? That can all be tweaked with pretty simple variables. So I could limit to the scope of this rule. So if I had like subfolders in this bucket that I wanted to limit it to, I could do that. I'm just going to go ahead and click apply to all. Of course, be careful when you're doing this. And then I'm going to pick an action to expire current versions of objects. And I'm going to set a number of days. So I'm going to say 30 days. So after 30 days after it's created, it'll be expired. And if I create that rule, now I no longer have to worry about that myself. So as I'm uploading backups to S3, I truly don't have to worry about them being long-lived or me paying for storage that I really don't need. I know that I'll always have backups for up to 30 days in S3, and depending on how frequently I take them will depend on how many backup restore points I have available to me. So I'm going to hop over back into AAP, and we'll see that the job did complete successfully. So if I come back over to S3 and I refresh, I've now got my new folder here and my latest backup. So I hope you enjoyed that process. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a note, and I'd be excited to see if people use this and upload it to other storage locations that make sense for their use case. So thanks for listening.